Hello and welcome to the last session in our CUNY-NYSIEB online series, Presentations for Educators of Emergent Bilinguals. Today we're going to be showing you part 3 of the Translanguaging Guide, which focuses on vocabulary and syntax. In addition to learning a little bit about language development, you are going to see examples of how some of the translanguaging strategies from Part 3 can be put into action in the classroom, and then think about what strategies you could implement in your own classroom. Part 3, language development, is separated into 2 sections, vocabulary and syntax. The essential questions for vocabulary include, how can we scaffold students' understandings of English vocabulary words? How can we develop students' academic vocabulary in their home languages? And how can we develop all students' awareness of vocabulary and scripts in languages other than English? In the syntax section, there are 2 essential questions. The first is, how can we scaffold students' awareness of English syntax, and how can we develop all students' awareness of syntax and scripts in languages other than English? As you can see from these essential questions, the point of this section is not just to help students learn vocabulary and English in their home languages, but also to build language awareness in your classroom so that students get a sense that there are many, many languages in the world. In language development, for vocabulary strategies, there are 4. The first is multilingual word walls on page 147, cognate charts on 152, 4-box graphic organizers and Freyer models on page 158, vocabulary inquiry across languages on page 165. In the syntax section, there are 2 strategies. The first, sentence building on page 170, and conferring about syntax transfer, which is on 176. The first strategies we're going to give you some examples of come from the vocabulary section, and we're going to start specifically with cognate charts. As you can see here on your screen, we have cognates for different kinds of animals in both English and Spanish. And it's not just Spanish and English that have a number of cognates. It's about finding out the languages in your classroom and seeing whether there are any shared words between the 2 languages, and then featuring those on some kind of a bulletin board or display. And here you can see there's actually the picture to go along with it as one more entry point for students learning new vocabulary. Another strategy for vocabulary building are multilingual word walls. Everyone you know who's a teacher has a word wall. For emergent bilinguals, it's important for those word walls to feature both their home and their new languages. As you can see here on your screen, you have a 7th grade word wall that features different kinds of words that are adjectives for people, right? In this particular classroom, they were learning about characters and describing people, and these were a number of different ways of describing people in English, in Haitian Creole, and in Spanish. And multilingual word walls provide opportunities for all emergent bilinguals and English proficient students to visually engage with words and vocabulary in both languages. Again, this is one of those ways of building language awareness in your classroom as well as vocabulary acquisition. Moving on to the syntax section, we have the strategy of sentence building. And this is beneficial both for students who are emergent bilinguals and students who speak English only. For emergent bilinguals, this is a great scaffold for them in order to see which aspects of sentence structure transfer from their home language to English and which don't. Right? In some languages, there's a different structure for sentences than in English, and those are important things to point out to emergent bilingual students. It also improves their comprehension of the meaning of each grammatical component in the English sentence because they refer to their home language translation. In addition to benefiting emergent bilinguals, this strategy of sentence building also benefits those students who speak English. By comparing and contrasting the structure of English and other languages, all students gain a stronger understanding of how English syntax works. And in addition, as we've been saying, they also develop an awareness of other languages. Here's an example of how one teacher used the strategy sentence building in her 1st grade classroom. Here, students were reading a book about animals and animal senses, and so the teacher used simplified sentences from the book that they read in class, and they learned how to add descriptive words in their English writing. By comparing different languages, the 1st graders saw that their languages, Russian, Japanese, and English, all put the descriptive words before the thing that they described. So not only were students able to learn about the syntax of English, but they also saw that their own home languages had similar syntax to English.
Now we're going to invite you to a virtual visit to an 8th grade mathematics classroom. It was a general education class. In this classroom, there were 4 languages. It was French, Bengali, Arabic, and Spanish. The goal of the class was so the students would learn to determine the volume of various 3-dimensional figures. She began by asking the students to write in their journals in English or in home language about each figure she introduced. For example, she introduced a cone that students were writing in their journals about this particular figure and where in the world they would find it. They could write in English or in their home language. After the students did it, she did a language inquiry with her students. So she put a picture of the figure in the blackboard and asked the students how they said the name of the figure in their own languages. They wrote it in each language, and then she pointed out when there were cognates or when there were parts that the different languages share. After the students were done doing the language inquiry, they created math glossaries. Each student created the individual math glossary, and they took notes talking about drawing the figure. They wrote the name in English, their name in the home language, the name in another language, and then they wrote about where to find the figure. For example, if they found it in a can. They also wrote the math formula to find the volume of this particular figure. When they were done with the math glossaries, the students were grouped by language groups, and they were given problems to solve with each of the figures that were introduced during this classroom. You can see in the image in the screen that there's an example of a problem in French and in English. For each group, the teacher provided the problem in the language of the group, but she also provided the problem in English, so they can refer to both when they were solving it. When they finished reviewing each figure, they solved the problem, and then the group presented how they solved the problem to the rest of the class, using words in English and in their home language too. Now let's review some of the translanguage strategies that were used in this classroom. The teacher used multilingual journal entries. They did a vocabulary inquiry across languages. They used cognate charts that they created with their vocabulary inquiry. And they created multilingual glossaries that each student continued to use after they were done with this particular class. She also used multilingual handouts when she was providing the group problems for each group. And she asked the students to do multilingual collaborative work in language groups.
Now that you've come to the end of our presentation of Part 3 of the Translanguaging Guide, we'd like to offer you 2 activities. The first is very similar to the ones that you have done for Parts 1 and 2 of the guide, and it's a jigsaw that will help you explore the various strategies that you just learned about in Part 3, Language Development. The second activity is a culminating one that we call a translanguaging scavenger hunt that will allow you and your colleagues to find strategies from the whole guide that you might be able to use in the classroom. Both of these activities can be downloaded from our website, CUNY-NYSIEB.org.